Yes.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes of July 11th and August 15th, and I would like to make a personal statement complimenting Vicki pouring out the most wonderful and amazing minutes. I see why it takes a while for her to get them written because they're long and complicated. So thank you.
I'll second the motion.
Moved and seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
I'll second the compliment.
Please know that.
All right, on to reports to the board. Staff Senate President Sean Best.
Hello, for those that don't know me, my name is Shauna Best and I am this year's Staff Senate President. We have a couple of items that we're working on. Our primary focus right now is to improve the overall wellness on campus among staff and faculty. Right now, we're trying to focus on eliminating the $4 wellness fee that we've been charging for some time. It doesn't net as much money as they were hoping to, so we're hoping to eliminate that. I have a meeting with Tammy in October, so that's my update right now.
Any questions?
Yes, you're talking about the wellness for the students,
No, this
Or
is a
the
wellness fee
faculty.
charged to staff and faculty.
staff and faculty.
Yeah, this year to date, since January 1st, it has only netted $140 for the entire 3 semesters. So.
All right. Thanks, Shauna. Thanks for being with us tonight. All right. Vice President Johnson, instruction update.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The Crossroads project, as you know, we're in there. The students are using it. We had a lot of activity, but we're not quite done. Just a few bits and pieces left to be done there. Some wall graphics that were delayed by the supplier and some furniture that was delayed due to a fabric shortage in what we had sourced. Much of that gets done here by the end of September, and then the final furniture pieces arrive mid-October. So at that point, we're done. The library project is rolling along. The good news is we're under budget at this moment, which is great. It might give us some flexibility to enhance what we're doing maybe as we get towards the end. The challenging news right now is that we're behind schedule a bit. We just extended to the contractor a delay of 30 days. So our substantial completion will be January 29th. What that means is we'll still be open for business when school begins there in third week in January, but we're going to be in some final stages as we approach the end of January with punch lists and those sorts of things. The reason for the delay is the first thing that happened to us that maybe I reported on is we had some asbestos abatement that we had to accomplish right at the front end, and we lost 2 weeks of schedule there. We didn't think we'd run into asbestos like we did. It wasn't big concentrations. It was just a lot of little stuff in a lot of places that had to be abated. The second thing that hit us was all the wonderful moisture in July. And that was right at the time when we were trying to dig foundations and pour concrete and so forth. And we had a lot of water that had to be pumped out day after day after day. You remember what happened in July. So those two things combined now have provided a pretty clear indication that we had to move substantial completion out. So I think we're going to be fine. They hope to have that building completely skinned, so weather tight, by 3 weeks from now, which doesn't seem possible when you're out there looking at it. But what's going on the outside are curtain walls and glass. Those come in large chunks. And so they'll just go up and we'll get tied in rather quickly. We won't do that until the roof's ready. And that's what they're trying to complete right now. So we're hoping we get that done in this 3 week period because we may escape any weather complications with winter that's coming. So keep your fingers crossed for no odd snowstorms in the next 3 weeks, and we should stay on on track. Lastly, I just mentioned the res hall. We're 3 weeks into design development. That's rolling right along. Meetings are happening every 2 weeks. In the interim between that, the architects are working at a hard clip to keep us on schedule. Tomorrow is a deadline for contractors to submit their RFQs for us to consider and evaluate, where we will select up to 4. I don't know how many will come in tomorrow, but we're going to select no more than 4 and invite them in for their interviews. And the interviews for the contractors will occur on October 3rd, which is intentional because we go before the SLID board on October 4th. And we want to be positioned to award that contract the day after we get our SLID approval, or maybe minutes after, if I can get it cooking. So that's where we stand on all the projects, and a lot of exciting things happening.
Any questions? All right, thanks. All right, on to the president's report. Dr. Shaky, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good evening. I'm going to dedicate my report tonight walking you through and talking a little bit about institutional effectiveness. So you know, just as a reference, one of the elements in your policy on CEO evaluation is that I bring you various reports through the year. One of those is an institutional effectiveness report that I bring you in the fall, typically September of every year. And so I want to kind of walk you through some things. And I have Dr. Mark Perkins, our newly anointed Director of Institutional Research here tonight, who's going to help me with some of this as well. So the place that I want to start is really on that first link in your agenda, and that's the completion goal tracking. You've seen this slide before. It basically represents the trajectory that we'll have to be on to meet your goal, which is to set increase completions at LCCC 5% per year through 2022. And it's a significant and very aggressive agenda that you've set and that we continue to use as sort of our benchmark, our guidepost. You've seen the graph before. You know, in the first year, we had a record-setting class. The second year, we had a record-setting class. And then we dropped off for 2 years for a variety of reasons. But what's important about this year is really looking at the trajectory moving back in the right direction. We made some substantial changes at the campus that really took effect in the fall of 2015. And so it was really in the spring of 2018 that we expected to start seeing the outcomes from that. And that's what we saw. We jumped back up to 811 credentials produced. The second page on that handout, if you scroll down on your iPad or your screen, is a historical perspective going back 10 years of the degrees and certificates awarded at LCCC. And the one point that I will keep stressing here, because I think it's really salient, is that over the last 5 years, we have had the 5 highest years for the numbers of credentials that LCCC has awarded to students. At the same time, we have had 5 years of declining enrollment. So I'll say that again. The 5 highest years for the numbers of credentials our students have earned. At the same time, we have had year after year declining enrollment. And I show that because that really does illustrate the way we've refined how we take care of our students, serve our students, educate our students, and the fact that we're focused on getting them across that stage. And even with fewer students coming in the door, we're getting a higher proportion of them to actually earn their degree or certificate. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting things about the work at LCCC right now. If you look up in that right-hand corner, that overall increase, the percent change, 10-year percent change, it's 37% change in the numbers of degrees and certificates that have been awarded by LCCC. That's really something worth celebrating. So I'll continue to focus on that. We're all focusing on that. You can look at sort of the shift and the difference in the types of credentials that we've been awarding, where we've had growth, where we've had some reduction, where we've added new ones like the Associate Degree of Nursing, and how that's showing up there. But it's a good indication that the work that we're doing is actually starting to pay dividends for our students as we move forward. The next link in your agenda then is the institutional report card. And I want to talk a little bit about this, and I think Dr. Perkins will probably talk a little bit about this as well. So we created the institutional report card about 5 years ago, and the reason and the purpose behind the report card, the KPIs, and everything we were doing was to start putting data and evidence in front of people that really capture the essence of the outcome of their work. In higher education, for whatever reason, good or bad, we are incredibly process-oriented. So we approach our work from a process basis, the process of teaching, the process of admissions, the process of whatever. We think about the work we do. And one of the things we've been really trying to instill here, and I know you are aware of it and you hold me honest with this, is creating that culture of evidence, that culture of inquiry where people are actually looking at not just the process, but the outcome of the process, and is it actually having the desired effect that I want? And if not, what am I doing to help improve that from a continuous improvement perspective? And that really was the genesis behind the performance indicators and the KPI. To actually start putting data behind the work that we're doing. And as you heard at dinner, people are paying attention to some of these. The foundation is very attuned to their KPIs and their metrics on the performance indicators. There are some challenges with it that we've been looking at the couple of years, and this year, as you'll note, our overall grade slipped from a B from last year to C. And a lot of people have been sort of struggling with that, and they've asked me, I've been struggling with it. So productivity in terms of getting students to complete their credentials is up. We're doing it with less money. Last year's actual budget was less than the years before. How is this happening? And it's really highlighting some of the challenges we've seen, and one of the things that we'll be doing to tackle sort of the way we utilize the performance indicators. And I want to talk about those. There's really 4 major challenges with the way we've developed the KPIs at this point as they've matured. The first is the volatility of the measures. In some cases, because we have very small variances in the way we calculate grades and change, you can have small changes from one year to another, and that volatility will shift grades substantially from a D to a B and then a B down. The other thing with it is that some of the small measures groupings, the KPIs, can change substantially. And because we use their rolled up grade to influence the institutional grade, you can have an area like happened this year under fiscal stewardship, where those areas dropped to Ds, and I'll explain that in a second. But those 4 measures had the exact same influence as the roughly 16 under student participation and achievement. So what we've recognized over time is we've inadvertently created a weighting system within the KPIs instead of purposely talking about how we may want to weight or not weight those systems. The third issue that we're running into with some of these is that when these measures change out of our control, we have to redesign the system. And so what happened this year that we're trying to understand is, if you look at the fiscal stewardship, those indicators were really the ones that dropped us the most, and I believe had the greatest influence on dropping the grade. 2 of them, the methodology for how they were calculated changed. We used benchmarking rates. In this case, I think Mark gets iPads, if I remember correctly. They substantially changed the methodology, which changed our history and changes our benchmarking ability, which changes and influences the indicators. And so we have to build a system that really helps us there. Another challenge that we're recognizing with the current system over the year is that most of them are incredibly dependent on enrollment. So most people, if you were to say enrollment's dropped, we want to know enrollment to increase. I get that. But completion and student success has increased. Most people would say, well, that's a good indication. I would suggest we're moving in the right direction. Many of our measures are per FTE type of measures, or they use enrollment as a way to equalize whatever it is, whether it's degrees and credentials produced per FTE, whether it's the enrollment, persistence. A lot of those are enrollment measures. And because enrollment has such an influence, when enrollment changes, good or bad, this could happen next year. Enrollment could go up, and all of a sudden all our KPIs could go up as a result of that. That's not necessarily a good thing. And so this current system is really dependent on enrollment. And then the 2 that I think we're really trying to dig into, and which we'll get to a good segue into Dr. Perkins' work. The 2 challenges: 1, there's too many things on here. And so people are having a hard time figuring out, what do I really pay attention to? Look at, and then the other one is, many of these are too far removed from our work. So, you know, I know that Dean Wilson, of course, is a very astute and attuned person, but if I were to go in and ask him and say, show me how these specific measures are directly related to the work he does on a daily basis, it's a struggle. We've got to kind of think through it and kind of figure out, okay, how does persistence do that, and what persistence, and which programs and which courses. And so one of the things we're thinking about is how we start to get these types of KPIs closer to the work of the people that are doing it, so that they can think about what I can do individually to impact institutional effectiveness. And so I set that stage because over the next year or so, and like I said, Dr. Perkins may comment on this, we'll be looking at how we build off of what's been really helpful and useful with the KPI system, but try to minimize, mitigate, or even get rid of some of those challenges that we see with it. So you will likely continue to see a report card into the future. I will likely continue to utilize that in my state of the college. We will see KPIs integrated into all the institutional processes that they currently are: program review, budget allocation, human resource allocation, all those things. But we're going to try to fix some of the things that have proven to be challenges from a systems perspective with the way we're using the KPIs at this point. So let me pause there before I turn things over to Dr. Perkins and see if you have comments, questions, or thoughts on either the completions or the KPI report card.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Schaefer, I have a question. So you were talking about the idea that individuals in the college, and then all the programs in the college down to the individual, will be performance focused on KPI. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Trustee Little, we're trying to find ways to make these outcomes connect to the daily work of individuals.
Oh, okay.
So they don't feel, so right now, if I'm in fact, so I'm Dr. Wengeline and I'm looking at my science program and I go into the KPIs and I see that average credits to completion or average cost per FTE is X. It's easy for me to say on one case, or for Amy to say, well, that's not my program, that's the institution, so maybe it's something else, or I don't understand how that's calculated, what can I do about it? And so we don't do that. When we can actually show those things closer in and understand how the expenditures for a specific program impact the total cost for that credential, and we start getting down and talking about what they can do then to minimize that, to help expedite the path for a student to get through their program.
Mm-hmm.
So they're completing the program in 64 credits instead of 94. Then we get closer to their work to doing that. And what we found is this report card is just too big and nebulous out here.
Right.
And it's hard for very busy people to take that and bring that into their work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that answers my question, because I was picturing somebody sitting down, like you talking to Dr. Wengeline and saying, this doesn't, you know, how does this, your performance fit in with this KPI? And I'm going to, well, Amy's brilliant, but I'm not. But looking at you cross-eyed and saying, what does that have to do with me? So the way that you explain it really helps me. So you can translate the KPI language into something that you can go to staff and say, yeah, how much is it costing you, Amy, per student to get this done? And let's talk about that. Is there a way, you know, are you spending enough money? Are you spending too much money? Because I think sometimes, you know, we have to look at both sides of that.
Correct.
So so that answers my question. Thank you very much.
I have one question. Just maybe it's going to be addressed, but just thinking about your last statement about paring it down, using as an example, this academic preparation, which looks like it had a decline from the prior year, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just quickly, some of those went down and it looks like one went up and a couple stayed the same. Are you suggesting that if we're looking at a category like that, and I'm not asking for a specific answer, but in general, that maybe some of these are not measuring what we need to measure? And even though they went down, but it wasn't relevant. And the one that went up maybe is relevant. I it's kind of trying to think like that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Salazar, I think that's a good point, and that's part of what we have to go through and actually take a look at where we can, and what Dr. Perkins and what our pathways work has actually helped us do is try to find those indicators that are fewer and earlier in the data stream, if you will, that are predictive of multiple of these, so we can actually simplify and really focus on the things that may actually make a difference in what those outcomes are. And so in some cases, there are things that may be out of our control, and so we wonder about that. In some cases, there just may be things that we measure that really don't have any direct bearing on the work that we're doing. So we're trying to get a little bit more close to that. So we need to go through each of these and have the conversation and say, one, is the historical data, the benchmark data, really consistent enough that we can minimize the volatility, and can we protect against methodological changes and things like that? Two, does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? Three, is it actually measuring what we want to measure or think leads to that outcome? And really start to pare back those measures that way and try to take a look at them differently. So that's how we're going to approach it.
Yeah.
Part of it, we won't get into the statistics, but part of it is also the grading system by using, just a handful of inputs to calculate a standard deviation. In this case, I think we have to mark, 5 or 6 data points. You're already struggled there statistically, and then we use standard deviation to create the scoring rubric, if you will. Well, in some of these, when you're talking about the tenths and hundredths % difference, it gets really hard to make up a big difference when you just have such a small margin. And so knowing that a small margin up can impact a grade or a small margin down, but they're really not statistically significant, it impacts then the way we think that, we're not doing good. So in one case where they went down, were they statistically significant, or were they just things out of our control? So we need to look for that and now think about how do we get more sophisticated. The good news is it's done what we wanted to do. It's made us really focus on evidence and outcomes. Now people are getting more savvy to say, okay, now are we looking at the right outcomes and the right metrics?
Well, as a comment, I would say less is probably better than this big giant thing. When I first saw this, even for as a trustee, I thought, how in the world are they making any decisions with all these things? Who knows what to focus on? So I'm liking what I'm hearing.
Good. Well, and that may be, I don't want to stop the questions, but that may be a good transition to give it to Dr. Perkins. I've asked Mark to come and talk really a little bit about what they're doing in institutional research to help make the evidence meaningful to the work of everybody. And so he's going to share a couple of case studies and demonstrate some of the visualization that he's created through dashboarding that I think has really helped a lot of folks to translate this stuff into action. So Mark, thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for the honor for coming here. In my right hand, I have something that's called the KPI handbook. Now, I have my PhD in research statistics and evaluation methodology. My dissertation was to develop a quantitative instrument to measure teacher readiness to use writing across the curriculum. 2 years ago, Anne Murray, my mentor and predecessor, said, hey, I want you to learn about this. This was one of the most complex and difficult things. Okay, in preparing this report card that Dr. Schaefer has shared with you, I spent 70 hours compiling and calculating data. And some of the questions that I've heard from the trustees and some of the comments that Dr. Schaefer have mentioned have brought up some very key concepts when it comes to measurement theory in general. The foundation of measurement theory is something that we call validity. Validity is the extent to which something measures what you purport it to measure. Now, our KPI system has a lot of validity in it, okay? But we really need to re-examine this. And one of my charges as new director is to kind of re-emerge our IR advisory council and ask the folks across campus, how should we look at ourselves? And in general, research comes through stages, and the number one thing you do after you decide what you want to learn is you examine the literature. So one of the things I'm going to be busy with on top of everything else is how are other places doing this? The second thing that kind of jumped out was when Mr. Salazar, right, mentioned less is more. There's a word in research for that, and I actually use it in this presentation. It's called parsimony. It's sort of the same concept as Occam's razor. where the simplest solution is usually the best. When we measure things, we want it to be simple. And the third thing that jumped out to me in this conversation was usability. How useful is this instrument? As a researcher, I asked myself that, and I've had conversations with Dr. Schaefer and many of our deans. How useful is this? How much are people utilizing this? What is useful, what's not useful? So these are all things that I'm very interested in looking at in terms of our, I guess the way we look at ourselves. I will say that a lot of my work with the way the Pathways Initiative sort of looks at things, I find that to be very useful, and I'll show that in a bit with the dashboard that we developed here. But really, Dr. Schaefer asked me to talk about how are we monitoring effectiveness here at LCCC. So I took the last couple of years that I've been here and all the things that I've seen go on in the IR office, and I prepared sort of 3 dashboards and 2 studies. I had a third study on your agenda, Learning Commons, but I don't want to keep you here all night. So I cut it down to 2, and then I make a list of other things that we do. And I just want to kind of go through the direction that the office would like to take, okay? We're moving more towards user-friendly, online available dashboards and less towards Excel files and PDF print-offs, which is what this is, by the way. All right, so what is effectiveness? It's the degree to which we're successful, right? Are we being successful? Well, we're interested in like persistence, credentials, completion, course success, things like that. But also, if you have an individual program or a student service, that in and of itself is also going to define success in its own function. For example, the counseling center might define success as students feeling better about themselves, feeling more efficacious, things that aren't necessarily related to, say, our KPI measures. Okay, so it's really defined in the context, and there are things that we're evaluated on sort of federally or statewide that are considered effective, and there are things internally that are considered effective. So there are 2 ways that, there are other ways, but there are 2 main ways that we sort of look at effectiveness. And the first way is we're developing systems that can be cast campus-wide that can allow individuals to drill down into the contexts that are relevant to them. So for example, a science teacher could look at different data points and different indicators related to his or her courses. Or we could look at it at the institution level. And in a moment, I'm going to show you some dashboards, a couple of dashboards that we've started to develop that do that. But the second way we can do that is to hone in and focus more on individual programs or functions or purposes within the campus, okay? And I'll give you some examples of those as well. Maybe they have more detailed or contextual questions that they want answered. So that's when we come in and we customize a study and generate a report. And I'll show you. And I think I've shown some of these to you folks before, but some of these are my favorites, so I'm biased about it. So I'm going to show you 3 Tableau dashboards, and I'm going to show you 2 different studies. And then I'm going to show you a list of other things that we've done, reports and studies that we've done in IR. So let's get it. So I'm going to show you the program analysis, the institutional rubric, and a pathways dashboard. Then I'm going to show you program annual analysis, which by the way is connected to the KPIs. So this could end up being morphed and changed to our work this year, And then I'm going to show you persistence and placement protocol study. Okay, so the program analysis dashboard is like the KPIs, okay? There are a lot of different measures and they all relate to different categories. We have value, effectiveness, and efficiency primarily. Traditionally, before the state adopted Tableau and trained us in this software, and I'll show you that in a minute, we would create the system on Excel. But once Tableau was introduced to, through the WCCC. Dr. Schaefer asked me to develop a Tableau dashboard that looks at the program analysis system. So I have a link up here for you to get to it, and I already pulled it up to save time. So if you end up, or maybe you didn't, if you end up going to the portal, just click on there, and it'll take you to that My LCCC portal. You go to the institutional research page.
Dr. Perkins, just
Yes.
so some of you have been in there, but we'll have to do some training. So the My LCCC portal is the replacement of Eagles High. Some of you have been in, it's great replacement, and an upgrade from a portal. And so that's what he's talking about going into and accessing. So keep going, Mark, sorry.
That's all right. You click on, it'll ask you to log in, and then you click on academic programs. You scroll down, and I'm gonna play with how we display this. I've been playing with this all week. But there's a little thing here that says Program Analysis Dashboard, okay? This, I'll just open this up really quickly. This is a little manual that I wrote to show you how to use it. So I think about 4 people will read this. Are you not seeing this?
No,
We're seeing, I think we're gonna read it.
Ah, do I gotta do that? Can you see that now?
Nope.
Why is it doing that? Okay, let me just try this way. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so let me go back then. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, so when you log in to the portal, you'll come to the IR page, which looks like this. And then you click on academic programs. And then you scroll down, and that's the manual. I'm gonna open it in the new tab. Okay, and I'm not gonna go through this. You can look at it, but it just shows you how to use the tool. And some people might find this helpful. And then we have a series of links to different dashboards that represent our program analysis system. So for example, this one looks at FTE, head count, success rate, and credits. And then there's a little table that shows what each of these measures are categorized in according to our system. Okay, just for the purposes of tonight, so I don't take up, I'm just gonna click on this link. So if you open that up, it'll take you to basically a data graphic area. But the first thing you'll see is a little bit of information about what this dashboard is showing, so that as you're flipping through it, you can go back and go like, oh, that's what that means. And then up here, you see there are tabs. Those tabs are where you can access the data. So here we have by term FTE, head count up here on the top, and on the bottom, number of attempted credits. And then if you hover over a point, this one has a redundant, but if you hover over a point, it will give you a little bit of extra information, including head counts and the specific numeric value. Over here are filters, and we categorize our programs into groups. Sometimes several programs might belong into one group. So you can select all or a combination or only one of these. So I'm going to choose some very big programs here.
I think you should throw natural science in there just since we
No.
have an interested audience.
Okay.
Or maybe I should choose that one, Brian.
No, you probably should. It's pretty sweet.
So you can see that the graph automatically refreshes here to reflect both education and English simultaneously. I didn't want to single anybody out. But then if you click on the other filters, it will limit it only to those subjects relevant to those program groups. And then you can also click on elements of the graphic and sometimes filter as well. So now we've just reduced it to that one term. So, I mean, really, if you go through these, I find this very user-friendly. A couple of things to keep in mind though. First of all, I suppress values so that anything less than 10, you can't see. because I don't want people to be able to single out students. Like I know 3 students were in that class. Philosophically, sometimes would it make a difference? I don't know. But it's sort of a state policy and it's a best practice. So the second thing is that I'm in the process of working with the commission, and I just talked to Tully Holmes today on the phone, and with our registrar, Stacy, and other folks, in allowing direct, like, username password access, given your LCCC credentials. So what that means is, when we get to that point, we're shooting for November. The academic, ALT, the academic learning team, and other folks, the cabinet, and myself can collaborate to determine different hierarchies of permission. So for example, if Amy wanted a dashboard just on her courses, I could custom design one and then only assign it to her and maybe other folks who should see it. But those levels of permissions are not my decision to make. That's a collaborative institution decision to make. But the potential here is pretty phenomenal. Okay, so that's one example of a dashboard that we've developed.
Click on success rates for us, Mark. And
Oh, yeah, you should.
just so you can see.
Of course.
Oh.
So I'll explain what this is, because I'm so used to looking at this, I need to slow down a little bit, right? So this is the percent of students who are in A, B, C, or S, okay? And you can, again, filter by similar categories, but I've also provided a table to give the numbers. And I spent an incredible amount of time looking at our archive data, the past work that Ann did, and matching it with these numbers to make sure that we're valid. One thing I should mention is this dashboard is tapped directly into the state server.
Oh.
So I'm not pulling these data off of Excel. And so I can set a refresh schedule. So if I design a dashboard for somebody and it's dealing with some things that they want to see longitudinally, I can have it refreshed. But you'll notice some cells are empty. That might mean there's less than 10 in there. So it ends up with null values. This dashboard has been, the initial phase of it, I had everything on one, but I ended up crashing it because of the amount of data. So I split it into several dashboards, which, let me close this, are all listed right here. They're categorized based on the way the data are organized on the server, but I'm working on some more nerdy methods so that they're actually categorized by the table. Because that'll be more user-friendly for our instructors. It's always a process, every day, in IR. So another dashboard that we've created, and now you can probably see my PowerPoint, right? Good. Is an institutional rubric dashboard. We also call it the Common Course Assessment Dashboard. We have 10 measures that we look at, okay, and you can see what those are. I provide a link for you here as well.
So these, Mark,
Yeah.
so these are the institutional general education learning outcomes. So when we call institutional rubrics, they're the outcomes assessed by students using the institutional rubric. So those gen ed outcomes like collaboration, interpersonal communication, cultural awareness, scientific inquiry, quantitative inquiry, or reasoning. These are our gen ed outcomes is what he's talking about.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so a couple of things about this. I don't want to get too technical, but we have just switched to Canvas. And traditionally we were using D2L. And we were pulling Excel files from D2L, and then I converged those Excel files, multiple years and terms worth of them, to create this dashboard. But just this summer, we were able to create a direct network connection to Canvas and set up a schedule to pull these data directly into the tools that I use, like Tableau. And what that means is I should be able to eventually join those things with student data that we enter on our colleague system. Things like, course grades, full-time, part-time, all those other things. Before, I would have to manually enter them into Excel using different Excel nerdy things. But this is gonna expedite that process. And what that means is I'll be pulling from 2 different servers. So instead of Excel, which is a fixed database, I'll be connected to servers that are refreshed and updated in real time. So that means the front end of my work will be very laborious, but once it's developed, it'll be a lot more efficient. It's sort of like if you put a new furnace in your house, you just need to get it maintained as opposed to putting a new furnace in every year. So if you go back to that exact same page, and you actually, it says institutional outcomes, common course assessment. I'm gonna have a manual on how to use this too. It'll probably have a lot of redundant stuff from the other manual. And then you click here. This is that dashboard. And it takes time sometimes to load because there's a lot of data. Millions of data points oftentimes. So what I have here is tabs, and each tab represents a different rubric. We have collaboration, interpersonal communication, written communication, verbal, a lot, aesthetic analysis, cultural awareness, information literacy, problem solving, quantitative reasoning, scientific reasoning, and then this one is sort of specialized for our science programs that they developed. Okay. And so when you scroll down, you have, here you have average score. And you can see there's a key. So the highest score is 4. So this just shows you, and we had a weird dip in 15 summer, but this shows you average score across time. These are also suppressed. Okay, values less than 10 are not included. But up here, I added a nifty little option where you can look at how many people scored at each level of the rubric. And then if you click on there, that little window will tell you what that is. So you can go from the mean scores to the distribution. You can filter all sorts of ways here. The same program analysis group in our system, subject, course name, level. I left out course section. Again, when we get permission level stuff, that's something we could add, term, and then score category, if you're interested in that. But in addition, we have graduation status. If you graduate, you didn't graduate less than 2 years, 2 to 4 years and more. And the interesting thing about Tableau is you don't just have to use the filters. You can also click on the graph. And then now it's going to show you the distributions and metrics of everybody within that category. So the potential for folks to drill down and customize is pretty solid. And there's one thing I forgot to add on this one, and I need to add on to this one, is one of the things that we're always trying to do is look for ways we can fine tune ourselves. So I have a little link down here at the bottom. And if you click on that, it takes you to a little, hey, I saw something wonky or weird. Or hey, could you add a filter? And then that goes straight to our smart sheet. And then I check it daily. So far there's one. Me, and it says test. I'm sure there will be more as the year goes on.
So Mark, go back to the academic program one.
Sure.
To just demonstrate.
This one?
Yeah, that one's great for that. So here's how you may find, and this is what we're trying to do, is get this information out and closest to the people that are doing the work. So let's say that I'm an English faculty member and I'm involved in teaching English composition. And we know that English composition is one of the primary courses in which we teach the effective written communication skill that we want our students to have. So I could come in here and I could filter down to English 1010. Show us how do we do that, get down to,
So I might start, just to make it simpler on myself,
okay, start in English, sure.
English. And then it should limit it just to English courses here, once that refreshes.
Training data, yeah.
Okay, the reason why it doesn't show that is because English doesn't use, let's go to written communication. English had one term that used collaboration. And
So stop there, so, oh yeah, no, filtered by the English courses, sorry.
that's all right. So we're at average written communication. Okay, so I'm gonna filter by English.
So what you see then and you get is for the English courses, as they go through, they filtered by that subject. This is your proficiency scale. So let's say, okay, we're on this last spring, we had what, am I reading that? 2.68. So that's our average score on that rubric. So if you look, 0 is no evidence, 1 is insufficient, 2 is developing, 3 is proficient. So we were closer to the proficient end, but not quite there with proficiency, right? Okay, so now what we want to say, so what are the areas where we did well and we didn't do so well? So now click on the data point where it shows by the individual criterion up in your top graph there. So where it converts that to the individual score criteria.
Oh, that's not a link. This one, the score key?
No, but how you did on the last one where you,
Oh, you mean this?
yes, sorry.
Distribution of written traits.
So we say, okay, well, we're not quite where we want to be. We'd rather see that average be over 3. So now let's go in and we can actually look by the traits, the identification of the audience, how I've developed my content, the format, all of those things. And I can find where I have the lowest outcome for there. So a 2.56 under my mechanics.
Yep.
So as a faculty, now I can think about what I'm doing in my classroom or as a collection to say, what are we doing that teaches mechanics? And what can we do differently to improve the way we teach mechanics? Which becomes part of our assessment plans and then goes back in, and then we keep coming back to this semester after semester after semester. So it lets faculty actually get in and look down to that outcome level to say, how well are students learning? Where could we use the improvement? And then actually do improvements across the curriculum to make that. That's what the dashboard is allowing people to do independently because they can log in and access that. 5 years ago, to go get that information, I don't even know how we would have gotten that, let alone if we were collecting it. So when our accreditors come in and say, show us how you're assessing student learning and what you're doing to improve it, this is an indispensable tool now that any of us can go in and point to. This is how we're using data to help improve student outcomes.
And the thing is these sorts of tools can be customized through our office. So if you wanted to compare different courses within your content area, like 1010 versus 910 or something like that, you just ask IR, can you do that? I develop a dashboard for you, and there it is. So these sorts of things are going to end up just a constant evolution.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Mark, where do you get this information? Is it from test scores? Is it from, where does this come from?
So at the end of every course, our instructors fill out a rubric on the learning software like D2L. It used to be, now it's Canvas.
Uh-huh.
That learning software then houses it into a spreadsheet type format, and then we pull that information and put it all together.
So the instructors put this on
Yes,
based on what?
there's a rubric and a rubric guideline for them.
Which he's looking for. So each course has what's called a common course assessment. So think of it as a English 1010, I don't know what they're using this, but they have a common final paper. And they grade that paper based on this institutional rubric that is broken down by those criteria.
Oh,
Those grades or that assessment data then go into the system. And so you have multiple faculty across multiple sections that are essentially doing the same some common course assessment, collecting those data on our student, they go into the system, which allows us to look at all of our students who are participating in courses that build this general education outcome.
Okay.
So they're using, we call them common summative assessments. It's basically, for people who don't like business talk, plug your ears, it's quality assurance. You say, these are the things that we assess whether or not students have learned what we want them to learn. We collect those data, we store them, we look at them and say, where did they do well, where do we need to improve it to improve essentially the quality outcome.
So that an instructor would need to know that rubric or have that in rubric instruction so that if I was an English instructor, I would know what kind of things to look for when I grade that final paper so that I can fill this out. But that's all in that rubric instruction, right, Mark?
Yes,
Okay, I get it now.
and I
Thank
think we should have, if we don't, we will tomorrow, I guarantee it. Yeah, we need to put
Yes.
a copy of the rubric right here, so people can look at it.
Mr. Chair, Mark, before you move on, I want to follow up on Brenda's question here. So the assessment is done by the judgment of the faculty. Is that what I'm hearing? That it's not a measurement of the students, but it's through the judgment of the faculty in these various rubric areas.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, yes, but the judgment of the faculty is based on an agreed upon rubric, where we agree that developing means this when we talk about audience or mechanics. And so every faculty is working off of the same rubric, which helps us minimize the variance in subjectivity or reliability. Am I getting my statistics right? Or is that
Just throw out every word you know.
reliability? So yes, they administer a final paper, they score the final paper, but they're all using the same criterion rubric to score those paper, and that's really what equalizes the variance of online versus face-to-face versus faculty members to do that. And the faculty have collectively developed those rubrics based off of their experience.
And if I may continue, and this process has been going on now for how long? 1 year, 2 years of using these rubrics for the faculty assessment of the students.
14 fall is the baseline data that.
Okay, so it goes back a number of years. So you have some data for reliability on this. What I'm really, I guess, questioning here is the validity, getting back to your concern, the validity of the information that is coming from the faculty about the students and how we are testing how valid that is. I guess that's the question I'm asking.
Mm-hmm. So to address that question, we have with our Pathways Initiative, Course Competency and Outcome Committee, which I'm co-chairing with Dr. Daniel Powell. One of the charges of that committee is to examine the validity and reliability of the courses and outcomes, or the outcomes that we develop. One of the primary things that interests me in situations such as this is something called inter-rater reliability. Inter-rater reliability is the extent to which if I give teacher A and teacher B the same assignment and ask them to fill out a rubric, are they going to have the same grade in the end? There are other ways to measure and examine the validity and specifically the reliability of these measures. One of them is called internal consistency, and I have run some internal consistency tests on these. And some things come out high, some things don't come out that high, and that's one of the things that we need to look at as a competency committee and a competency team. Another way you can look at validity and reliability is you can correlate scores with things that are similar. For example, if I look at a written communication score on an essay, how well does that correlate with some other score of writing? So these are things that we definitely want to examine as we develop this system further. So I think that's a very valid. I really don't want to get too down the nerdy
I'm not asking you.
Because I can
But
get
you're,
really-
you're moving in the right direction, in my opinion.
I think what we have here is a good foundational tool to begin with. It's sort of like the KPIs, but I think we're constantly examining and developing. When I used to teach quantitative measurement at the University of Colorado, I always told my students, I said, an instrument is not ever valid. It's the data that are valid. So that means every single time you use an instrument, you have to make sure it's still up to snuff, okay? Because over time, things change. That's why things like IQ tests and other things are always updated periodically. And that's kind of what we need to do. And one of the interesting things I think about the Pathways Initiative is we're looking at expanding this beyond just these specific categories. We're actually going to look at what's relevant to a course and a program and how can we measure that as well within that context. So I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot of interesting developments in terms of course competencies and outcomes. But sir, I think that your question is should have been worthy of my dissertation defense.
On that note, the dissertation defense, just in the essence of time, there's other dashboards, but I want him to show you one of the case studies. So I don't know if you want to do retention or the placement one, but this is one where they're getting information out to people. But Mark and I are also working very closely with groups and individuals to do case studies to help us make informed decisions that improve processes, improve student outcomes. So why don't you, whichever one you want to talk about, placements.
My favorite is the placement study because this study challenged me as a methodologist in many dynamic ways. But essentially the question we are asking is, are the measures we're using to place students in college or developmental math and English validly placing them into college and developmental math and English, right? And what do I mean by placement measures? I mean, we typically use high school GPA, ACT, ALEX, and McCann. Those were the four big ones that we used. So we looked at how well those predicted placement.
So everybody familiar, placement, understand it's an incoming student, how we determine which level of course to put them in. Okay, good.
Thank you. So this is the bottom line. If you are interested, I have a 30-page report. And an executive summary. All right. High school GPA by far, and this aligns with the literature. I think it's Brown University just came out with a study. Some universities are only using high school GPA. High school GPA by far, best predictor, followed by ACT English and McCann for English. And then ALEX and ACT Math showed high efficacy for math, developmental and college math placement. And we found something interesting. Older students are more likely to earn higher GPAs and pass. And one of the things that's exciting about the study is we actually had a committee and we had a policy decisions. We expanded the amount of years that we accept your high school GPA. We re-examined the way we administer the ALEX system. This is, what makes me excited. So, but here is a scatter plot. Okay. So pretend that we're in a gymnasium and we draw LCCC GPA from 0.0 to 4.0 here, and then high school GPA 0 to 4, and then we have everybody stand where their high school and LCCC GPA scores intersect. So we're looking at the top of their heads, and they all dye their hair black. Okay. Even though this is the best predictor, this is the best we've got. That's like 0.4 R. Don't worry. That's not a good number. Okay. This is saying that 17% of the volatility in LCCC GPA is explained by high school GPA. That's ugly, especially if you're one of these natural science people. Okay. But in social science, this is the best thing we have. look at this. Here we have a student who, these are just weird outliers, but here we have a student who, you know, did really awfully in high school, but is nailing it here. And then we have the opposite over here. But you can see there is sort of an upward trend. This is called the line of best fit. It shows you the average slope. I can say for every 1 point in high school GPA on average, I'll go up this many points in LCCC. So if you add more variables, you can't really see this anymore because it goes to 3 and 4 dimensions, but you do explain more, okay? But my point is placement is a tricky business. And it's a national conversation at this point, and it's exciting to do this work and look at this stuff.
So before you go on, so here's the history and how these things happen. So we traditionally would take the vast majority of our students, bring them in and have them sit in for a high stakes placement test. What we used at that time was called the compass. And the compass was to assess them on their reading, writing, and basically mathematical quantitative abilities. We'd use these scores and say, if you're a 22, whatever, you go into this math. If you're an 18, you go into that math, and do all those things. The predictive ability of those tests was being found over and over and over again to be horrible. In fact, what it did, it actually placed students in lower levels of coursework than they actually could be successful. And then there became all these non-cognitive impacts on student thinking they're developmental and not succeeding. If you were to put, so we did that, and they still do that across higher education, because it's an easy thing to do when people come in. You can test them. And we all think that determines if you were to put the compass, scatter plot the compass outcomes on here, it would be far worse than what it is with high school GPA. So while that certainly doesn't have the correlation coefficient that we want, if you were to put anything we used to use on here, it was worse. And that's one of the challenges. So the two takeaways for us is, one, let's quit making it so complicated and use the best thing we have, which is cumulative high school GPA, to actually place students into college level or some other type of support. But two, let's recognize that whatever we use for placement has a very small predictive ability of whether or not a student will succeed. It's all that other stuff outside of it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mark, can I go up there and point at something?
Absolutely.
May I? So
I hope I didn't
Do
get my
we
finger.
know who this person is?
No.
Because this person got a B and they're in high school and they're flunking out. Do we know who that is?
Well, I know. I could look up who that is, yes.
Because if I were this student's instructor, I would want to know who that student is. What's going on here?
Oh boy, is that a perfect segue into our pathways conversation. So that's the point, is there are other things we need to be aware of, whether or not students are succeeding or not succeeding. So show us your list of what you're working on, and then we'll make the transition.
Well, this is actually, Dr. Schaefer, I wanted to just point out one thing, two things. These are the takeaways from our work in IR. But one of them is students who can structure themselves and push through adversity are more likely to succeed. And that's one thing that high school GPA measures, because anybody who's I taught K-12 10 years, okay? One thing that anybody knows that a lot of times grades are about being on time, punctual, etc. Second, students who are more involved on campus are more likely to outperform their counterparts on every measure. I don't know if you've read the literature on persistence and retention, but we've been saying that for 30 years. Just look up a guy named Tinto, T-I-N-T-O. Finally, and this kind of goes back to the questions we have about KPI, enrollment trends and other trends seem to align with national trends. Our enrollment runs very exactly parallel, almost not exactly, but very nearly parallel to the enrollment trends of two-year institutions. When we had a dip, so did everybody else. So we're not really much different. A lot of the research that I'm doing confirms a lot of the research I'm reading. And I think that's sort of par for the course and research. All right, I'm done.
Thanks, Mark.
Any more?
One comment that we discontinued using Compass about 2 years ago, right? So we have 2 years of data of using the GPA of the high school students and placing them for the various math and English classes. So we're, what, 17%, if that's not what I remember in here, is what we had. And I'm not sure what that 17% meant.
Predictive ability of high school
Predictability.
GPA to predict
Okay.
success.
We're hoping that that's going to increase, right?
So,
Yep, we're going to have better predictability as the years go on.
so Trustee Erickson, to your point, we can already tell you, we have, not only have we placed more students into college level math and English than we have historically, our success rates in those classes continue to rise. In fact, our success rates in the developmental courses continue to rise, and that was the big fear, is you take those that were going to succeed anyways and you put them into college level, that your developmental courses would actually drop. And so the takeaway is, by doing that, we're putting more students into college level courses that would have historically gone to developmental. And we know that drop off that happens there, and they're succeeding at higher rates. We already know that, and by using a much more simplified approach to placement.
And that's something that we should shout about.
And that's where, to summarize, that's what we're trying to do, to take institutional effectiveness and IR and get it closer to our work where it's going to have meaning. So it's not lost in the ether with this. We're actually now taking the data and trying to drive it down into practice and use, or get it in the hands of the folks that can actually make a difference with it on a daily basis.
I just have one comment. I know what that 17.4 means in terms of explaining the variability. I might be the only one who knows it besides you and somebody else, but the thing I'm kind of wondering about is when you combine the metrics you're using for placement, there's a correlation between those as well, right? So then you can decide if they have some interaction effects that maybe mean that they're, when you combine them together in a multivariate model, that actually is not going to be as predictive as you might think because of that too much correlation between the variables.
Yeah, that's something they call multi-collinearity.
Right.
Is a statistical
Right.
assumption that you check.
I don't want to get there,
But what that means is
Let's get the dictionary
everything follows a symbol, correlates too highly. But there's another rule in regression, and I
right.
know we have to
But
move
the
on.
thing I want to
So-
say is, are you planning to build? And I'm going to say this before I ask. I'm not asking for this, but I'm a statistician, but I don't believe in ever a numbers only analysis. So there has to be more to this besides the numbers only analysis. And I appreciate what Dr. Schaefer is saying, that if you push somebody, which is something you can't see in a number because this is all post-mortem, then what can we need to test the limits of the students. The numbers analysis is just an indicator. The real work comes from our intuition, our insight, and our wisdom. So it goes beyond this, I think. And I'm a numbers guy. This just helps you think, but it shouldn't be your only thinking.
They're smiling behind you because you're feeding into their
They're
presentation.
nodding their heads.
Like you can't believe. So thank you, Mark. Mark's available. I mean, if you want to get lost for a couple of hours in some interesting conversations, it's really worth talking to. But what we've done over the past few years, in large part because of Mark's leadership, and really the inquiry from the campus, I think, has truly changed the way we're using evidence to help inform practice. And we're starting to see the positive outcomes as a result of that. And if you want to know, the retention study is fascinating. I mean, there's just great stuff that's happening there. And so I wanted to make sure, as part of our talk about institutional effectiveness, that we get down and show how we're actually making this change on campus as a result of the work that we're doing with IR and other pieces. So thanks, Mark.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask Mark one question?
Yes.
You made the comment that enrollment, LCCC's enrollment seems to follow the national enrollment picture as far as enrollment in community colleges. But it seems like years ago, when the economy was not so good, unemployment was high, then we saw an increase in enrollment in junior colleges. If you look around us in the states, Colorado, Utah, and so forth, they're doing pretty well. And I would think that then people are employed and not going to community colleges. But in Wyoming, we're not in that situation. but yet we're still following that trend. Is that similar? I mean,
I can go.
The census, unfortunately, when we look at enrollment trends with two-year institutions, they tend to be in census data, they tend to be a bit behind. So in the future, we might be able to detect those effects. In addition, I think it would be very, very interesting to isolate regional enrollment trends, and that's something that we could compare here as well. I do know that you make a good point. I mean, Dr. Schaefer and I looked at some economics data, and you know, Wyoming, among other coal states, experienced negative population growth in the last year or two, and we just can't yet see whether our enrollment is paralleling with places like Colorado, Nebraska, et cetera. But what I did notice is there was a jump in enrollment during around 2008, and then that started to decline during the recovery. And now we're at a point where where is it going to go next? And I think that's where your question would be answered there.
Or you can take the simple answer, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Cato. Two things impacted us. One, still structurally fully employed, even in the major population centers in Wyoming. Gillette College actually has seen an uptick in enrollment because that's one of the areas where we haven't had the enrollment rebound. But the employment and the out-migration. So the thing that's different this time is that people that could be mobile had other opportunities. And so we lost working age individuals. So instead of coming to college, what they did is they went to other states predominantly for employment is what we're assuming. So Wyoming is one of the only state in this region that actually lost population of those folks. So those two things, the out-migration of the population that would go back to college went somewhere else, probably to Colorado or to Utah to get a job for that, or they went back into the labor force here, which we're seeing, with 3.7 unemployment rate essentially in Laramie County. That's the difference. Whereas the main recession, everybody tanked, and that's why enrollment went up everywhere. There was no place for people to retreat to. Great question. All right, pathways. Thanks. Mr. Chairman, I know we're going to plow through this, but as folks, you guys probably have this scripted. So part of our guided pathways work, as you know, we have to participate in various institutes, and the institutes are intended to bring us together with the other 13 institutions and really connect with thought leaders, folks that are doing this work, researchers, national partners. We just came back from our second institute from Scottsdale, Arizona, that was focused really on student intake and student support services. And that's why, Trustee Salazar, a lot of your comments and questions, of the question that Trustee Little brought up fits perfectly with the conversation we've been having about how we structure intake and ongoing support services for students to help them persist in many ways outside of the classroom. And so we've got all the wonderful people who are leading this work here to kind of talk us through this. So I think I will stop there and look at who's going to go first. Okay. Okay.
All right. You have a yoke?
You may want to introduce yourselves as well. Just I know most people know you, but.
Yeah, Adam, you're starting.
Okay.
Poor Adam.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to come speak to you today. My name is Adam Kaiser. I am the Gear Up Program Manager. So I work with students in high school, low-income, first generation. So I am the main person that deals with this process day in and day out. So I take the students, I try to walk through it and make it happen. So it's a process near and dear to me. So.
And I'm Sarah Hannis, and I'm the Director of Admissions.
Stephen Crimes, I'm the Director of Student Planning and Success, which includes advising, TRIO program, and career services.
And I'm Zach Arrears, I'm an instructor in biology.
And we should maybe also make it clear that Adam and I are the co-chairs for the Streamlined Effective Entry process, and then Zach and Stephen are the co-chairs for the advising model.
So along with us at the Institute, there was also Julie Gersher, who who, what's her official title?
She's the Student Services Business Analyst.
She just takes care of us, quite frankly. She's just really good at, I call it herding cats, but she's fantastic at keeping us on point with what we're trying to do. And Dr. Schaefer was also there, and Miss Judy Hay was there.
Sure. I'll take whatever. Sorry, I've been teaching all day, so I didn't even know what I was taking. But
And they came back Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah.
So
the main thing, I think there was a couple highlights that came out of this conference, and we always want to start off kind of with our vision, right, for this college, which is based on our mission and where we're trying to go. And so changing people's lives is what we're about, and that is a difficult thing to think through in the process. But at this conference, there was a number of kind of salient points, I think, that came out of it. The first one was this idea that student success is something that is not just one of our jobs, and sometimes we break it up into these categories like, oh, you're an advisor, so you do advising, and I'm a faculty, so I educate, and so on and so forth. And really the reality is we all do pieces of that, and we have kind of different backgrounds in which maybe we have skills to add to that, but we're all a part of that. And one of the things that I think is important for us moving forward with this Pathways thing is kind of getting a united vision for us to move forward on. And I think in my mind, it hit me, this is our vision, right? We're all a piece of this, moving this project forward and helping these students to be successful. Couple other things that came out of this was the idea that we need to focus on relationships and not transactions. And a lot of times we get really caught up in the transactions that we're responsible for, right? I'm responsible for grading these things and giving this grade. Someone else is responsible for getting them through financial aid and checking those boxes and whatever else. And sometimes that becomes what our day-to-day is, and not the person that's sitting in front of us and who they are and what kind of things they're bringing into the scenario that may be barriers or maybe even positive things they're bringing to the campus. And so that was something else that's kind of been a big push in the Pathways thing that I think was a salient piece that we kind of used as a framework to do our work while we were there. Is think about relational and not transactional. That's sometimes difficult to do. And the last thing is, of course, students need to come first. Not our needs, not necessarily the needs that help us kind of run the college every day, although we have to have those things. It needs to be about the students' needs first. And so those were kind of the things that as we were doing all the various workshops and discussions that we were at, those pieces really started to come together for us as far as the plan we wanted to have going forward with the Pathways initiative.
So we had homework to do. We brought our homework. So in the backboard right there, the middle is we had to map out the student process of how many steps it takes for a student to become an enrolled student and then even through their first semester. So that's us right there in the middle. It was hard for us. It was hard for us. It was hard for our staffs. It was hard for our students to look at it. And this is what we're putting the students through. There's different tracks, there's different things. Of course, everything means different things, but everything with a red box around it is something that we are making all of our students do. And so I think I've heard lots in this room, Joe talking about processes and Trustee Salazar talking about it's more than a number. So we need to be getting more information from the students. So that was our homework and we brought that there. Zach quoted Adam during the institute that we front load a lot of what we need and not what the student needs. So we're saying take placements and do orientation and do, and we're not really bringing in a lot of other information from the students. So we do need to be putting them first. So we have a picture of, we brought visual aids back here for you. So where are we going? We did bring copies of all of our work. If maybe I can just, I should have passed these out first. So there were lots of breakout sessions where it was just us working. And we worked and we took notes and we all collaborated on what do we need to be doing. And I think this, I don't really know when Joe sleeps because we did all of this, we wrote it on these, and then Joe said, oh, hey, look it, we have this great document that we've passed out here. This is where we need to be going. We need to make it simple for the students, just simple steps. We need to be collecting more information at the very beginning from students so that we know more information about them and we can be better prepared to lead them in the right direction and take them on the right path.
The other thing I would say is when we were going through all this stuff and we made this map, but then we'd be sitting there and talking through it again and again because it was even complicated for us to kind of wrap our heads around. But also a lot of that was transactional, not relational. It was not about learning about the students. It was about what we needed to, because we thought that was important to get them through this process.
I think all of it is.
Yeah.
And I think even the way that we ask for it. And all of it. I mean, some of the sessions we went to just thinking about our marketing materials and the things and how we're pushing students to do things. I mean, we need to focus more on the relationship and getting them in the door and understanding who they are and they're not just a number to us to get them in the door. Next.
Me? So what comes next is we've taken all this information and we're still looking at the process. The picture here was, we couldn't bring this because they started falling off. What was the different, we try to stay away from tasks that we have students do, but there are the things that need to happen to get a student enrolling there. And we've kind of placed it at a different level. This actually says entry here, over here, it actually says graduation. And you see in the normal student process coming into college, you come in and it's a lot of high touch, a lot of high interaction. As a student becomes more self-sufficient, more efficacious, to use the word earlier, they need less and less help as they go through here. And so, as they go through, we kind of narrow things down. So we're going to take this concept and begin to work together as two groups, coming together and working on that, hand off the intermediate part, and try to take these pieces and put them in the best places we can. Go ahead and do the next one. So that's the same map we saw earlier, but we've added some tasks that we have to do when we get back here. So we'll be going back to our teams. We're going to be talking within the teams about these different pieces that need to get done. Identifying things that need to get done and where they need to happen in that process. We have a lot of different possible models we're looking at. We've got some concept models that are way out there, and we've got some that are much more scaled down. So the more extreme ones are high change, high relations, and hopefully high impact, but they do come with a high cost and high change. And we also have some that are much less change, less on the relational side of it, but they're easy to do. So we're going to be taking these pieces back to the groups and find out what's actually going to work and what can we actually do with that. Like I said, the orientation or the streamlined entry team, they've got some things that are beyond there that they need to work out themselves, and the advising team's got some back-end things, more with the faculty advising type of piece that we need to work out that remain separate, but a lot of this is coming together as the two teams here. Some of the things that are not on that map or that are not on this map that were on that map, and they're not consolidated yet. I don't know if I get in trouble. So like there's not an orientation necessarily here, but it begins with a more in-depth discussion and time with an advisor one-on-one to build that relationship initially. And then we add in a celebration, is what we're calling it right now, at the beginning of the year, where they all come together and we do more of a traditional orientation. And the idea behind that was that when the students come to us in the summertime, they've got things they want to know right now, and they need to know immediately, and we want to give that to them instead of giving them all this other stuff that we load them down with. So hit them with what they really want and what they need earlier, and then fill in the rest here. Other piece is really putting a more emphasis here on the Coles class, where we are really talking about some of those things that we presented in orientation. But now we're going to hit them a lot deeper. within Cole's class and trying to reinforce some more relationships here by having assignments in the Cole's class where they have to meet with the advisor more than once this semester, and they have to actually start meeting with the faculty to that first semester, so we can start bringing the faculty back into it. Have a little bit more handoff when it's time for them to go work with the faculty and less with the advisors with that. I'm missing anything on any of all this?
I think the one thing is when they're gonna do this part here, this will be primarily within their academy, so the Eagles
Yes.
Academies, if you've heard anything about that yet, a lot of these Eagle Academies. So this idea was kind of, they'll come, hopefully maybe come in themselves for sure, but maybe even bring their family. We'll kind of celebrate the fact that you're here and that we're excited about you being a part of this. There may be some pieces of information we help them with orientation wise or get them up to speed on, but at the same time, it's more like, okay, this is what it's going to be like when you get to the end of this. We got some work to do, but we're here and we're excited. Let's get through this. They get to meet some of their fellow people within that cohort. Then we start helping to guide them through some of that work in that first semester, and then they'll come back around.
Another piece that doesn't really highlight real there, we're responsible for bringing in career search earlier on, making sure they understand what it is they're getting into and what they want to do. So we're talking about in the actual admissions process, we're looking at some software and things we can bring in where the student does initial confirmation of what they're thinking about maybe, or maybe exploration if they need a little bit further with that. On the entry piece here, when they meet with their advisor on the intake, it's kind of goal matching session where they say they want to do this, but we're also talking about their goals. We want to make sure what they plan on doing is actually going to get them to their goals. So it's the second step in that career and major exploration piece. And then when they hit Coles, it's more in-depth assignments where they actually have to do longer inter-surveys, a little bit more research on the career, a little bit more research on the majors and things like that. So we're really getting them through, so they're really thinking about what it is they want to do to make sure they're on the right path and stay on with that. So the next one, is this all right? Yeah. So again, like I mentioned earlier, we're working, collaborating as a team, the two different groups, coming together a lot more. We've got to review all these different pieces, make sure we're not missing it, with all the deans, with the students there, and the faculty, make sure we're not missing everything, run these ideas beforehand, because we've got a lot of potential models out there. But we need to take all these different pieces and see actually which models are going to work for us, what's feasible by numbers and costs and things like that. So, anything else? Okay, then the thank you slide. Any questions?
Yeah, one. Is that the current? See, let me swim.
Yes.
That's the current.
The middle one's the current one. Even though the one up here where we handed out looks a lot more slimmer, there are still things in there that aren't really identified, but we're working on eliminating.
And then this is like a target, like what you would like to see.
Right.
And are the red things the
some of the tasks we're going to bring,
like the hurdles you have to overcome to make sure you get there?
Yeah. That's kind of the nuts and bolts, or maybe even the chassis of what we're going to start building, and we'll start building around some of those pieces. That goes in it.
We have
Cadillac.
we
I
have-
know.
We have post homework to do after this institute that's due next month as well, and I think that's still going to drive us to, keep the conversation going, and then it'll continue with our teams and working together to get clarity on all of those red questions.
So then, I like what you're saying, relationship, but I'm also think there's ritual, like that's an old ritual. You're establishing a new ritual, which to me is just another way of saying you're trying to change the culture a little bit. What kind of roadblocks do you anticipate you might need trustees' help from to help with that? Maybe roadblocks and changing the ritual or the culture. Anything?
I'll take a stab at that.
Okay.
So there's a couple in here, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Salazar. A couple in here. The first is one of the things we recognized early on is we need to automate some of the processes through technology and through programming. The traditional response, and I'm not pointing fingers, it has been, we can't do that. And as a result of not actually pushing through some of the technology changes, we're placing additional steps onto students and they're becoming confusing. And as we know from the literature, you had one too many of those and it's an excuse for them not to come. So one of our first things is we've got some technology things that have to be automated so that it improves it from the student's end. And we've got to work through the, no, we can't do that versus the, no, I'm sure we can. Let's figure out what it takes to get there. I would say another one I'm going to point out just because Dean Wilson's in the room. This model they propose and they're moving to basically eliminates the entire concept of placement. Goes out the window. There's no placement really for the most part, except for what would be automated predominantly off a high school GPA or perhaps even self-placement. So remember, only 17% of the student's success could be predicted on the high school GPA. All that other stuff is probably non-academic. Who would be the best person to determine whether they need additional supports or not? Probably the student. So that's another one that's going to be talk about rituals changing. I mean, the ritual of student placement has been in community colleges for eons, it seems like. So I would say those two are going to be big hurdles. The third one, of course, as they said, depending on the model they build out, may require a significant investment of resources into personnel. Maybe not, but I think you keep saying the Cadillac model, and Cadillacs are still expensive. And so that would be the third hurdle, in my opinion.
I would agree. It depends on the extent, how close we can get to the concept art, when we're actually building this thing. More change, it's going to require a little bit more change. I didn't mention, throw this in here because it's part of actually our group, is we've got the technology. Can I mention the presentations coming? October 9th and 16th, we will be bringing back EAP Navigate and Civitas. Look at our student technology pieces. For their final presentation, we were giving them each a day to show us everything. We told them what we want to see, and then hopefully we'll make a decision off that and bring that information forward on what we recommend.
I think another thing that I think about is change management with our staffs. So if we're changing what the student does, we're also changing how our staff does things. So thinking about student staff and my staff and being supportive of them and how we, hey, change, you're maybe doing something differently than how we've always done it before. So I think that's very key too, is we want to keep our staff happy and move them in the right direction.
That's a big roadblock. Any other questions? You guys are doing fantastic work. This is awesome stuff. So keep it up.
They did have fun, but Adam's still bruised. He was the whipping boy, it seemed like. For
Only because they couldn't afford
Adam?
Maybe he deserved it.
See, it just comes easy, doesn't it?
He has no heart.
Yeah, that's right. I've got pictures of everything.
I'm sure you can. All right, we have some approval items moving forward, and I'll turn this over to Vice President Harris.
Yep, I'm actually going to pass most of this off to Dr. Wangeline. She and Dr. Roars and Dean Wilson have been working really hard on this. In my opinion, we have created a world-class science environment in this college, and I am so proud to get to work with the folks. I was going to say I'm proud of their accomplishments, but it's like I can't take any credit for any of their accomplishments. I was kind of thinking my children, I can probably only take about 25% credit of their accomplishments, and I can take less than one because we already had a phenomenal environment when I got here. But this is a piece of equipment that we have been accumulating wonderful pieces that I think are going to turn our college into a destination place for students who want to learn science, because they have the opportunity to use the equipment here that they will rarely get a chance as an undergraduate, especially as a freshman, sophomore in the four-year institutions, that they have a chance to get in and actually learn the science. So you're not just using the equipment and stepping away, you're learning the science. But I'm gonna let you talk about what the equipment is and kind of the structure of how we're gonna finance it.
Okay.
We go.
Thank you guys so much for giving me a few minutes. I love to come before you guys and tell you about cool things that we're getting to do. So this is kind of a very serendipitous whole bunch of like stars aligning for us to be able to get this particular instrument. So it's called the TXRF, which stands for basically X-ray fluorescence. It's kind of even the simplified version. But the goal is that what you can do with this is you can analyze the elemental concentration of anything. So if you want to know how much, not anything from after aluminum, sorry. So we can't do carbon, for example. Let's say you want to know how much sulfur is present in something. This particular instrument, it's about the size of a printer. So it's like, yay. And you take these little acrylic discs, which there's a supplier in Fort Collins, you have to buy the sheet. It's 4 by 8, like the size of plywood, right? And they cut out 1 inch acrylic discs. So you get a lifetime supply out of 1 sheet and it's like $50. So it's amazing. So you take these little discs and you put your sample of whatever it is. And if you want it to be quantitative, you want to know exactly how much is in there, like parts per million or something, you can add a standard. But say you don't. Say you want to ask a question in a class, like, I fed my horse this, and I want to see what is the elemental concentration in my feed, and then my horse pooped this out, and I want to see what the elemental concentration is there. Because what I thought was when I provide them these vitamin or this feed or whatever, that they're absorbing, nutrient X. And so we can have students in their classes being able to ask questions that they can answer themselves using this elemental analysis technology. I have been doing elemental analysis on stuff for my research since the beginning of my PhD, and I'll tell you the instrument that I had to use for that at CSU has its own room, and it's run on argon gas, and it has also a nitrogen carrier gas, it has a plasma flame, and it's cool to see. I mean, the first time I took my picture in front of it, right? But it requires an institution to invest in the space and personnel to run it and things to maintain it. And this, we're able to have this box like the size of a printer. And because it's that small, it's not light, it's like 80 pounds, but it is still mobile. So say we're like, you know what, we're going to use this instrument in ag this month, and then we're going to use it in chemistry this month, and we're going to use it in geology this next month so that we can really make use of it. So the cool thing about this is there's a huge grant, RFP being put out by the Embry grant, which is what I typically get my funding from that we do use our research program for. And they're actually giving us a $50-ish thousand RFP. It came out today. I was waiting for this meeting to start. I'm about halfway done writing our proposal for it. So it will be beautiful and amazing. But that typically our equipment grants are $15,000. So you can see this is a huge advantage. It's more than 3 times what we typically can get for equipment. In addition, I started looking into the instrument that I want. So I've used one of these down at UNC. Our students now use one, but they prepare the discs and then we send the discs to UNC. UNC does the analysis and then they send us the data back. That is better than not doing it at all, but that's not as cool as the student being able to put it on the disc, put it in the reader, get their data, and then draw their conclusions. So when the opportunity came up, number one, that the money was available, the grant was going to be available, I started looking at, could we get one of these instruments? And found out that they're like 110,000. So I was like it's a much bigger jump. So, I called the guy and I played the community college card. And I was like, our job is to teach. We want students to get our hands on this instrument and be able to ask these kind of questions. And he was like, that's great. Because then when they go into industry, they're going to know how to use our instrument. And he was like, whoa. And I'm like, you are my people. But I told him, I said, at the absolute max, we could probably do 75,000. And he's like, oh, okay. Well, I'll get back to you. And I'm like, oh. So he came back at like 85. And I was like, and like $10,000 at a community college is not just like, well, oh, here's 10. I'm like, and so he was like, I can do 75. So I'm like, all right, we can work with that. So then we had a meeting with Dr. Harris and then my dean, amazingly, and all across campus kind of selling the opportunity that we have for this. And so we have money contributions from agriculture, from workforce, from the vice president's office, and then from math and sciences to fund 15,000 of it. And I'm going to ask for 60 for the grant, which I've been able to do in the past. So if you guys remember our renovation that we did, it was like, this is what it's set at. And then And if not, I have some money in our base grant that we can backfill due to we paid for some of our genome sequencing ahead of time, so we have a little wiggle room. Regardless, we have the money now to put down a down payment of $25,000 towards it, so we can hold this instrument. I didn't mention the reason we get the $75,000 one is it's a demo unit. Still has a warranty, like it's actually fancier than the one at UNC, which I've been enjoying as well. So we pay for it now, and then I write the grant, and then when the grant is funded, we pay the remainder. The company's fine with that. I feel really confident in the grant, or else I wouldn't be to this point. If for some reason things fell apart, the company has agreed that they will refund us all the money that we're putting down on it. And so it's kind of like a win-win-win-win. So I'm happy to answer questions. And if you want to analyze cool stuff in about like 6 months or so, you can come see me and I will hook you up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, your exuberance and your excitement for using technology and delivering opportunities for our students to learn with technology that you're aware of, and your ability to interact with potential providers, vendors of the equipment that you are interested in. How could we possibly say no? So I would therefore make a motion that we approve this request for the $15,000 that would be necessary, and also, I guess, ratify the use of $25,000 for a down payment.
I'll second the motion.
You need us to say that we approve the expenditure at 75,000. I think, don't we have
That's
to
right.
say that?
Give them the authority for the
Yeah,
full
was
amount.
that in your motion, Don?
Well, I guess it's not in the motion because I think it's implied. If it needs to be in there, okay, this is a 75,000, yes, I'll add that amendment. That'd be
Okay,
fine.
thank you.
So I'll second the amendment. Wait a minute.
So on the amendment, it's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to the amendment? All right, amendment carries.
Good, you said that was a friendly.
They have to vote on the.
Now the motion to approve has been moved by trustee Erickson and seconded by trustee Soto. All those or any more discussion on that? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you so much. And
You
I
got
just,
it,
to respond to what trustee Erickson said, I'm excited because I'm able to see my students get so excited that they get to do what they call like real science versus cookbook science. And then they go on and do what they want to do. So the whole transform your students' lives, like it's pretty like tangible for me. So I kind of geek out a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving forward onto the fourth grader Cheyenne LCCC trustee representative on the implementation committee. Hopefully you guys had a chance to read what that entails, but with that, trustee Ketchum, I would have him be appointed. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve that?
I'm so moved.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by trustee Merrill and seconded by trustee Soto. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
I think trustee Ketchum is an excellent choice.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bob has agreed to be the backup on that as well, so appreciate that. Okay, so on to board reports. And we'll go ahead and trustee Erickson with the finance and facilities.
I'll have to defer to trustee Ketchum because I was unable to attend that meeting.
Yeah, mainly, we discussed pretty much, Rick discussed everything that we discussed at our meeting dealing with the, all the building, Crossroads Library, residence hall, things of that nature. Everything's good in our monthly financials, there wasn't anything showing of concern to me. We are not going to have a meeting in October based upon our early meeting of October 3rd. I believe the audit is coming up in October, so we'll have that meeting will be in November before this meeting, and then they'll come with the audit and explain that to us in our November meeting for approval in the December meeting. But other than that, that was everything that we discussed in the meeting. So I have to make a motion though, correct?
Yes.
I approve the Finance and Facilities Committee. Is it the balance sheets? Yeah, just approve the following items.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for that. On to new business, and I will turn it over to Trustee Merrill.
Thank you, Chairman Brad. We, in our policy, must self-evaluate as a board, and our Ms. Lauren, amazing woman that she is, we'll have that ready around the 25th of September. We'll have about 5 days to fill it out and return it. It'll be on the internet. And then we'll discuss it in our October 3rd meeting. So I don't have a sense that any of you are leaving town, so is that true? Will you all be around and be able to take that evaluation?
In November?
No, in September 25th
Oh.
through September 30th.
Sorry, Carol,
Is when
yeah.
it will come out. So, and then we'll discuss it on October 3rd. So thank you.
All right, so new business for me. I've asked Trustee Salazar and Trustee Soto to pretty much be the nominating committee for officers. So you may be hearing from them. They have agreed to that, and so they'll probably be in touch with you guys over the next couple of months regarding officers for next year. So, any other new business?
Not new business, but I have a question.
Yes.
Am I correct that we are now doing English as a second language? Do we have a course in that? Am I correct in that?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, yeah, we've done ESOL for quite some time and actually have provided two different tracks. One is traditionally provided through our ACES program, our adult basic ed, but we've also had a track that's more of a English as a second language, but for college success to help students who are non-native speakers to be able to succeed in college and speak in college.
The reason I asked that question is I was of the opinion that that had been discontinued. So it had not been discontinued, or it's being resurrected. What's the status?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, I think the extent to which we offered it had been scaled back substantially, but no, my understanding is we still provide those courses to do that. We used to have a much more, I don't know, Dr. Harris may or may not have information. We used to have a much more robust offering, in fact, kind of almost an ESL program for non-native college students with it. But ended up pulling some of that back, merging some of it with ACES and to do that, but we still provide that as a service and a course to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Okay, on to next meetings. So we do have a meeting coming up on October 3rd. Right now, it's fairly light on the agenda. You don't have to answer tonight, but if there's something you'd like to add to that agenda, or if we'd like to scoot that meeting up, just to throw out some options. So I'll leave that up to you guys if you want to give it some thought and get back to me.
What do you mean scoot it up, Brad?
Maybe move it up and then they'll start it at 5. Maybe
Oh.
actually start the meeting earlier and potentially eliminate the pre-board. Or as I was thinking about the pre-board, maybe having Dr. Perkins come back and discuss some of those things that he didn't have a chance to get to. But I will leave that up to you guys.
Trustee Parker. So we have two items on the agenda. We have the audit and then we'll have the evaluation results. Those are the only two items on that this time.
I believe at this moment.
Okay.
So give it some thought. If you want to discuss it tonight, we can do that. But if you can, give me your thoughts by the end of the week, because that is just a pretty quick turnaround.
Mr. Chairman, I thought I heard Trustee Ketchum say something about the audit in November and approval in December. Was that what was discussed at Finance and Facilities?
I believe that's what they have to give us. I don't know exactly.
As opposed to bringing it forward in October?
Based upon, since our meeting's so early, yeah, he'll give the committee he'll give us the basic part, the pre-audit. We'll look at that, then it comes into the meeting for approval in November, because we'll have to present it to the board. And then I believe it's,
So you do expect for Wayne to be at the meeting in October,
he'll be at the Facilities and Finance meeting,
but not at the October?
not at the October 3rd meeting.
Okay.
And we won't have an October Finance and Facilities meeting. He'll be at the November meeting. So he'll present that to us at that time.
Okay.
And then we'll present it to the board
In,
November. And I believe the December one is when it's approved.
there's an early meeting in November too, it's November 7th.
Right. But he'll be able to, it's November 6th, I think, is when the Facilities Finance.
Oh, okay, the day before, okay.
Right. Because we'll discuss the October financials.
So that means there's only one thing then on the agenda for October.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
It's very confusing. I know.
I don't know if Dr. Hammond at the Albany County campus is doing some work on BOCES. And we've already visited Casper and talked to that group. And then on Monday, I know Dr. Humphreys and we're going to go to Rock Springs and talk to the BOCES group out there. And then on Tuesday, we're going to talk to the Sublette County group. So we've got some information that may not down the road at some point in time be useful just to discuss with the other trustees about what we've learned about their programs and the amount of money they raise and what they're doing with their funds, since we've talked about it, but yet haven't taken the next step of implementation of it. So just a thought. I don't know if we'd be ready to do something in October yet, but Dr. Hammond's giving me the thumbs up, but
When you
just a
Rock
thought.
Springs?
On Monday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then Tuesday we'll have Sublette. So we'll have 3 different Board of Cooperative Education inputs to talk about. But
So, Mr. Chairman, is that something we can have a report on October 3rd?
It sounds like it from the Pat shaking his head. Yeah.
I would like to hear about BOCES, if we could do that.
Mr. Chairman, can we have, also have Lisa Trimble come in and give us an update on the campaign? Just to
That's a
let us
great
know.
idea. That's a great idea.
Just the same kind of information that you gave us tonight.
That how we're coming. I think that's a great idea also. And I have one more thought is we talked, somebody mentioned tonight about going to the East Campus in Pine Bluffs. Would the 3rd be a good time to do that?
No, she mentioned
No.
that next spring would be better.
Oh, spring. That's right, Brad.
We
You're
were
right.
gonna do that.
That's
what
right.
we were planning on.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, October ended up being a tough month just in general for a meeting, so that's why we moved it all up to October 3rd.
Yeah, she wanted it in the spring.
If we can't fill that meeting.
Yeah, that's 3.
So we've got a few different items. If you have anything else that you wanna throw on that agenda, ideally, if you could let me know by the end of the week so we can make sure that our staff have plenty of time to get prepared. So, yes, end of the week deadline. No more will be accepted.
There you go.
Any other public comment for today?
Should I give my board or my ex officio report?
I apologize, I left that, I did not get the report.
Yeah, it's all you.
So as far as student government goes, we have a bit to report about the state of the Senate. We have our full health sciences school, including one The additional members, the member at large, the 4 we have are all health sciences. We're looking for 9 more, so 3 from each of the other schools to be normal senators. And at the moment, we only have 3 applications, and we're hoping for a few more. But this Friday is the extended cutoff because last week was the original. And we will be having our elections next week regardless. If we don't have enough members, we will be running, or if we don't end up with the full Senate, we will be running these special elections as we do most of the time. And from the looks of it, we will have our quorum because we cut down from our 16-member max to our 12-member max. So even with what we're looking at now, we should be able to have normal operating meetings.
As you go.
Wasn't there a different student trustee? Sorry, Terry.
The student trustee we had at the end of last semester that I was training has discontinued at LCCC, so I have taken over temporarily in their place. And it's my understanding that once we get our new Senate elected, we will be looking for a student ex officio from that group. However, our first meeting is October 2nd, so it may be a little difficult to find a new ex officio in the day we have before the next board meeting. So there's a fairly likely chance that I may be acting ex officio throughout this semester.
That's fine. I just was making sure I didn't miss something.
It's good to have you back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I guess with that said, Butch, did you have any other updates?
Let's see, Dr. Hammond, he and I talked about coming over in the ride over the hill. I think his number one goal this semester is going to be really community involvement, really getting into the community with working with different community groups. And I know in talking with him about relationships with UW and the high school, business community, Chamber Business Alliance, trying to look at those different groups in the community and seeing what we can do, Albany County campus can do. And I know the foundation staff has a very aggressive agenda that they're involved with, but we're also trying to squeeze a little bit of Lisa's and her staff's time to look at doing some foundations work over in Albany County, especially on the donor side, and building those community relationships. So we're going to be patient, but there's a lot of resources that we can, I think, capitalize on, especially marketing and brand advertising, that sort of thing. So we'll get there, but those are some things. And so we're working on the BOCES a little bit, and we'll bring maybe a report back to the next board meeting on some of the different programs and programming and so forth around the state, since we're the only entity that is not engaged in a BOCES of all the community colleges. And so, Dr. Hammond, was there some things that you'd like to add, please?
I think you captured the broad strokes of it. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the director? Thanks, Butch. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
I so move.
I'll second it.
No discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Just trying to keep